What's up? It's Matt. We are back with our second live of the day, another restaurant expert roundup. Today we're with Justin Khanna. Justin, what's going on?
How's it going, Matt? Thanks for having me. And two in one day, that's bravo to you, man. Hustling.
Yeah, it's usually don't do two in one day, but I had a chance to talk to David Scott Peters this morning. The guy's a financial whiz on restaurant coaching, and I had a couple questions I just had to ask him, so we hopped on. He's gone live before. I'm actually going to see him in 2 weeks in person, so I had to go live again. But we're here today, so I guess everybody tell us. I know you from the Emulsion podcast. Tell us about you, about the podcast, and about where you're located, all that good stuff. Then we'll dig into some questions.
Yeah, I'm joining you from Seattle, Washington. I did not grow up here. I moved here maybe 3-4 years ago off of cooking in Europe. I was, like chef de cuisine at a restaurant on the west coast of Norway, believe it or not. And so I'm giving you kind of the reverse timeline. So Bergen, which was that city, is a sister city of Seattle. So when it was time to move back from there, I moved to Seattle and started doing pop-ups. Around the same time, I was kind of, rounding out my almost 8 years at that time of like Michelin starred award-winning restaurant experience. And I was thinking through, when I want to do this thing of my own, how can I do it in a way that is more, at the time it was like 2018, 2017. And at the time it was like, Instagram influencer culture. Like I hazard to use that word, but it was starting to become this thing where you could do your thing and something on the internet to kind of like broaden out, kind of make your presence more multifaceted, have a deeper engagement with your customers or your audience or whoever that happens to be. And so, I started when I was 18 going to culinary school as a very I was really hungry. I was really ambitious. I was staging all the time. And the resources that I had at my disposal back then, which was, bloggers and all these chefs that were kind of like writing their first cookbook, has kind of like, I don't want to say has dwindled away because it's more or less transformed into something that is, more Instagram friendly. But I was frustrated that I couldn't find news that, and at the time, like Eater had moved all of their writing in-house. So you weren't having as much support of like freelance food writers to give information on the industry. And so I created the Emulsion podcast, which is something that I host every single week where I interview, professionals just like you, people who are doing like unconventional things with food. They either have experience in one facet of the industry and they're trying their gambit at something else, or, you're in that stage where you're just starting. Because I really took to heart the aphorism of like, you don't want Michael Phelps to teach you how to swim, because it's this guy who just has like insane genetics and he has the best coaches in the world. And he's just like, of course he's, going to achieve some level of, professional success. But, for the other 98% of us, how are we supposed to kind of like improve? And so that's kind of like rounded out with my, motto that I'm taking into 2021, which is like, I help chefs perform better. That's kind of like my goal in this whole thing.
So answer this question for me, and I think I might know the answer, but there might not also be a global answer. Chefs are, to me, some of the best artisans out there. What they're creating from you think about it, a lot of people, like an artist paints a picture. It's got the senses of the eyes and the emotion. Food brings in every possible emotion. And the one thing that really, from a marketer, just drives me crazy is how every chef doesn't figure out how to love being on video every day. Because I think they do an injustice by not telling stories every day about the craft that they have, that they are putting on tables every day.
I think it's difficult because a lot of chefs look to the kitchen as a creative industry that can actually allow them to indulge in their introverted side. I think that there's so much of, it's called back of house, right? Like there's front of house and back of house. And so this creative, I would argue it's what semi drew me into the industry early on in my career, is that like, I didn't want to be a starving artist. And I also didn't want to be the person who just goes up on stage and there's a team of 60 people who are just like making it possible for me to stand up there and, potentially lip sync my thing. And so it's this fascinating combination of, I think, drawing the comparison of chefs to other industries is almost a disservice because there's so many other industries that take inspiration from us. And so I think that's amazing. Like let's stand firm in the fact that being a chef is its own kind of unique combination of creative things. I think that there's a little bit of imposter syndrome that gets thrown around pretty frequently. And I also think that the low barrier to entry to creating content has given rise to this. It's easy to get a lot of followers from a single plate that, yes, might look pretty, but to anyone who's worth their snuff knows that, like, you're not really serving food that looks like that every night to the 100 guests that you're serving, you know? And so you don't want to be one of those people. And at the same time, it's like, who's to say that there's this other weird like permanence that comes with posting something on your Instagram. I did a lot of like work with restaurants in Seattle on their social media. I was creating content for a lot of them when I moved to Seattle. And one of the chefs that I was working with gave this analogy of like, I don't want to post that dish because it's going away next week. Like, it's not going to be on the menu next week. And so I don't want someone to come in and say, I want that thing that I saw in your Instagram feed. Because it's also with the algorithm, it's constantly like, you might see someone's post from 3 days ago just show up in your thing this morning. So it's how do you find that balance? Like that's going to be different for everyone. But I'm 100% in agreement with you, Matt. Like, why would you not take the opportunity to write your own narrative? Because if you don't, the food writer who comes in and is going to talk about your food from what they perceive your food as, they then control that narrative, because that's like the most available content out there for people who don't know who you are or what you do. So to take that into your own hands, like, that's how I would advise people to reframe it in their mind. Not like, I have to be this person who's just dancing around on Instagram or TikTok, you know, with my food.
Yeah, I've said many times that if somebody could create a program, maybe like, you know, a guy or, you know, one of these food entrepreneurs out there that have TV shows, and could create some type of program and training that they'll believe and buy into, that they would all do it. Because I look back, I'm 44. I remember in 1999 when I sold radio advertising, and every form of marketing back then, with the exception of standing on a corner with a sign, you had to pay for. And there wasn't the ability to quickly get your message out. And I look at, you know, friends of mine that are chefs, and I talk to them all the time, and, you know, some of the crazy stuff they come up with that you're like, wow, I never would have put that together. Why'd you do that? I'm like, if you were to tell people that, they would be captivated. They would be clinging to their seat to listen to you. And then they would be coming to your restaurant that night because they're like, oh, I'm hungry, by the way. So at some point, somebody's got to get through to a bunch of these chefs and realize they can take that craft digitally, because it's not going anywhere. The camera's easier and easier. Every year it gets cheaper and cheaper. I mean, you can live stream. Pretty soon you're probably going to be able to live stream from your watch if you want to. Maybe you can already.
It's totally true. And to even give more hopefully value to your listeners, I think that there's this really, I saw it on Twitter the other day. It was someone who runs social media for large brands saying something along the lines of, let's start coming more to the forefront by saying that content production and content distribution are two very different things. And I think that if you're in the headspace as a chef of, I have to not only do I have to make the food, but I have to like make the content, I have to edit the thing, I have to post it with the right hashtags and write the copy of it. And when all the comments come in, I have to respond to all of those things. Like, it's so common for chefs to think that everything has to be on their shoulders. And yes, there are financial hurdles that are in the way of you and kind of like the future where you have this great presence online. But don't let that, like, as long as you can acknowledge that, like, I'm actually doing the work of like 3 separate roles in this situation. I think that that takes pressure off of people from feeling like, oh, well, there's, you know, Gary Vee is the example that gets thrown around quite a bit, where he's like, post every day on every single platform. And it's like, he has a team of 15 people. And it's not to say that it's, but, and the thing that I want to add there is that, like, he started just with himself and a really shitty camera, and then just kind of like uploading it unedited with really weird graphics and awkward kind of like transitions. And he kind of built it slowly. And so everybody just kind of like, I feel like everybody holds the top of the mountain on this weird pedestal where it's like, what if you kind of like worked your way up to that? it's a slow burn. It's going to provide more value. So hopefully that helps.
No, for sure. And I think a lot of us also, we all only relate to the brand that we see today versus what it was 20, 30 years ago. I mean, I'm sure people have probably seen on Netflix the document or the movie Founder, how McDonald's just, started and went, and you look at like places like Walmart. I've heard, Sam Walton with Walmart and Sam started with a tent on the side of the road. And in Cincinnati, there's a place called Jungle Gyms. The guy's got a freaking train on the property that goes to his grocery store. He started from a fruit stand, and everybody sees the end product. I can never do that. Gary Vee's a good example. I've seen his different content, and you think it's impossible, but I started doing content years ago. 5 years ago, I really, really ramped it up. Like right now, I have a full-time video guy. I have some people that do stuff, but before them, I would produce 50 to 60 videos a week, just Matt Platt. The content didn't look as great. Sometimes the audio was jacked up. The images weren't that good. But you know what? It not only got me out of my comfort zone because I hated camera. It got me to practice my skill. And by just swinging that bat constantly, I got to a point where, I'm actually decent on camera now.
Agreed. I'm right there with you.
I think my screen froze up on me. There you are. Can you hear me?
You're good. Yep, I got you.
Hold on, I got an audio issue on my end. Let me take there we go. Okay, cool. But yeah, I think that's the big thing is that people don't realize that you've got to get the bad out of the way before you get the good.
It's true.
Here, I'm going to try something. I'm going to try and switch my device.
Oh, there you go.
Let me do this. Hold on.
Yeah, there you go. It usually got
no, there we go.
That's Zoom bingo for you.
There we go. Is that better?
Yep. All good.
I don't know what happened. I was sitting there looking. I had two devices going, and one of them started kicking out. But so my point there at the end was just the fact that I think a lot of us, we see that perfection, like Gary Vee. I mean, the guy's a freak. I mean, the stuff he does, the way he puts out is unbelievable. But it wasn't always that way.
No, not even close. And so again, I'm trying to give as much practical takeaways for people to either start today or just reframe how they think about it in their mind. Is the gym example is probably like the closest from the advice that I give to people, which is like, you see the person who has the 250 pound bench press, and you're sitting under that bar and you're just like, I can't do that. Like if you were to ask that person, how do you get up to that? They would give you the advice of like, oh, well, you just progressively overload that muscle. Like you start with wherever you're at, and the next week you add 5 pounds, and then you just continue to get stronger. But then when you ask them about content production, for some reason, people like, they don't apply that same school of thought to whatever you want your website to look like, or what you want your Instagram feed to be, or what you want the production quality of your YouTube channel to be like. I mean, to share some of my like insights, like I'm 126 episodes into my podcast, and I'm only now bringing someone on to help me book interviews. It's like, I didn't know when I started when that point would be, it's only now when I'm trying to juggle all these other projects that I work on, do I realize like, oh, it actually makes sense for me to put my hand up and ask for help. And not just that, but like from the owner of the business perspective, like I have to create the systems to replace myself for those types of things. And so in the same way that you would look at, like I have a coaching client right now who's like, I spend, probably like 25 hours of my week on the books and the admin and the marketing side of my business. And then I'm on the line every night. Like I'm grilling every single night. And so, we had to come to terms with what does it look like to replace yourself on the hotline, basically. And so, coming full circle with the social media and making videos element of it is like, why would you not apply that same school of thought to content production? For some reason, people get all twisted in their mind that it has to be something that it doesn't have to be. And so if that helps anyone, even just like consider getting started, I think that would pay dividends for you in the long term.
What are some of the things you've seen you've heard through your podcast that people have done that have made the biggest impact along those lines of storytelling or content?
It's a good question. I think being understanding that you have your own unique set of experiences that actually is a competitive advantage versus this thing that either like it always comes out eventually. Like it's this weird thing that people think that they have to like push down and kind of like sweep under the rug or hide in the closet. But over time, just by nature of like being on camera all the time or getting interviewed frequently or whatever, like it eventually comes out. I think if you watch my early videos, I was very kind of focused on being prim and proper and getting straight to the point in a lot of senses. And then, later on in producing content, I was throwing in like Dragon Ball Z references, which is like my generation. Like we grew up watching Dragon Ball Z. And with other people that come to mind is like the knife maker Don Wynn, who is just like completely kooky and goofy and like incredibly empathetic. And like the first 15 minutes of our conversation, we were talking about journaling, which is like not even close to talking about knife making. Like it took us 40 minutes to get to knife making. But, that his goofy kind of like empathetic nature comes through in his content. And I think that that's what makes him more relatable. And as I think about like all the other people that I've spoken with, the analogy that kind of like the thread that rings through with all of them is like brands are trying to be more like people and people are trying to be more like brands. And I think looking at it from the sense of, do you have to do that? Like, do you have to be like that? I think is a very, very interesting thought exercise for people to go through. But yeah, just like, don't like, because we're also, a lot of us are becoming multi-hyphenates, right? Like chef / media producer is kind of like my tagline, but then like, I'm also a co-founder of an event production company. And so it's like, should I have entrepreneur in there somewhere? So it's like, how can you bring all of that into, what makes you unique and ultimately like that's what people are going to walk away with remembering. It's not necessarily any of the things that go on your resume, if that makes sense.
No, it does completely. And I want to shift a little gears though, because I want to find out about the event. I love events. Mm-hmm. Obviously 2020 was a different year for events, but I guess tell us about that part of the business and what you do there.
Yeah. So that came to fruition, I suppose, when I was doing pop-ups when I moved back to Seattle. Or when I moved to Seattle, I wanted to know what my food looked like. I wasn't quite ready to like, I knew I didn't want a traditional restaurant. I knew that I wanted to do something that was like, took advantage of the amazing product that we have in the Pacific Northwest. I knew that I, again, wanted to figure out how can I bring more of who I am out into the limelight, because I was someone who, my food looked like a Frankenstein of all of the experience that I had. So it had like the polish of per se, but like the, foraged kind of Scandinavian thing of, my time in Norway. And then it's like a little bit of technique that I took from, working in Chicago where it was all modernist cuisine, everything. And so I was like, but then like I was mentioning, my dad's from India. I grew up in the Midwest. Like, what is it? What's my angle? What is my angle? Does it have to be my angle? Could it be, a business's angle versus Justin Khanna's food? And during that whole process, I got really burnt out. Again, being the chef that wanted to have everything on my shoulders. I was selling the tickets. I was producing the content. I was doing the podcast. I was cooking at the events. I was renting the plates and talking to the venues and doing all this stuff. And I met a woman at a cocktail party, effectively. She produced the cocktail party. And I didn't really know that many people at the event. And so as an industry person, I just like to talk to whoever the server is or the bartender is or whatever. And so I was talking to this woman who was like out and about, like producing this event. And she was like, well, I do these dinners all across Seattle in the Pacific Northwest. I do some stuff in New York, but I'm not a chef. And I was like, that's interesting. Like, how are you doing that? And so I basically came on as chef in residence at the event production company. And I started to realize that it was like, it's really nice to have someone handling the sales and, guest logistics and, scheduling and doing all this back end stuff that was not cooking for me, but it also like working with her immensely satisfy this kind of like entrepreneurial itch that I was dying to scratch, because I was in the negotiation meetings. Like I was able to pitch ideas to people. I was creating the culture at this company as well. And so that was all really, really fascinating to kind of like converge at the same time. And it's an immense amount of luck. Like my business partner and I have like such an amazing synergy together that it's just, we complement each other, and she covers my weaknesses and I cover some of hers. And so, yeah, that basically came to a head with Voyager's Table, which is the event production company that her and I own. We have about 7 employees spread all across, mostly Seattle, Vancouver. We have 1 in LA who's working remotely right now, and then 2 in New York. And 2020 has been hard, man. I mean, we were going into our first potentially like 7-figure year as an event production company in 2020. And it was maybe it was like first week of March, we were kind of like thinking, should we just like stop all these events? Because this is kind of getting scary. Like, we don't want to put any of our guests at risk. We don't want to put our team at risk. And we basically we just got hammered from everybody canceling. And not just canceling, but like people's mindset around gathering and coming together, which is so much of what we get excited about, just completely shifted with COVID. And, weirdly enough, like we were able to make a small profit in 2020 because we pivoted to this like online experience model, where it's not necessarily focused on getting individuals like my wife and I to buy a kit from us and cook dinner at home. It's more about like, and again, thinking about our community, like there's a bunch of tech companies in Seattle. A lot of them were forced to work remote. Their office is closed. They haven't seen each other in ages. We just did an event 2 weeks ago for a team who's completely distributed, and none of them have ever met each other in person, because like it's a startup that was founded like just before COVID happened, and they were hiring a ton. And so it's like this very niche market that, we were doing events for companies like that in the past, but we've just completely been able to work with them, partner with them, and bring their teams together, provide the kits for that. And so we'll do like a completely online events where it's like, you make a cocktail, I make dinner with you, and then we do live music with some of our like musician partners. We have like a whole creator in residence program now that didn't exist pre-COVID. And so it's like we're able to offer this full suite of services for clients, where it's like, it's not exclusively about the food. It's actually about, bringing your people together in an impactful way, hopefully. So that's
awesome. Yeah, that's something that's needed, because I think it's kind of wild. I remember back in like January, a buddy of mine called me who's not techie, and he was all excited over this thing he found called Zoom. And I was like, what? He's like, yeah, Zoom. I'm like, talking about the online software for meetings. Like, yeah, you ever heard of it? Like 5 years ago, bro. Like, but it was comical because he was like all excited over it. And then as everybody started using it, and people, like you said, started working from home and offices are disbanded, there's a human part that's gone. And like me, I actually held an event. I had an event here in Cincinnati about 4 months ago. I've been to probably 7 events in different parts of the country in the past 6 months. And the vibe's a little different for sure. And I think that it's gonna take people getting comfortable with where their region's at, because obviously every region's affected differently. But the online element, man, so many people don't know how to do online. I mean, I was in a group that had a bi-weekly meeting, and it took people 6 months to realize how to unmute themselves. It's like, but bringing back that, like you talked about, that event aspect to online, that's huge. That's great that you guys were able to survive and pivot and do something solid there for the year.
Totally.
What's a way somebody can talk to you? What kind of businesses? Obviously, you got the website on the screen. What kind of businesses are you looking to talk to, and who's your ideal client?
I think that there's 2. There is, I'll give some concrete examples, and then you can identify this sounds like me, or maybe this is not my cup of tea. So we had an organization that was, to your point, hosting these bi-weekly meetings. So twice a month they were trying to get their team together, different departments kind of like intermingling and getting to know you, company culture style gatherings where it was like, we want people to come together and learn whatever, or we want to have people come and talk about their last vacation that they took with their family or whatever. And they were just having horrible upticks on these. Like, no one was signing up to these things because they just felt the person managing it was effectively like way over capacity. Like it was just another thing on their to-do list that they were maybe spending 2 hours a week trying to throw together and make it exciting enough for people to book it. They started working with us, and it was something like 5 or 6 times the number of team members decided to join these things, because it was actually designed. Like, it was designed as an experience. The kind of like kit aspect of it is amazing because everything just gets like delivered to your door. Again, for a lot of that stuff, it works best if you're in like Pacific Northwest, Seattle, Vancouver, New York teams, especially too. But yeah, if you're trying to bring your people together and you're just frustrated with either like how much work it takes, because we're acknowledging that it does take a lot of work, but also if you're kind of at your wit's end, like, we would love to partner on something like that. And then I think there's this other element that I think that we're looking towards the future on, which is being able to reframe in people's minds what's, to your point, Matt, like what's possible online. We had a client last in December. It was a 2-day seminar where they not only brought clients of theirs, but prospective hires on their sales team in. We created like a bunch of different breakout rooms where the people on the team, the team that was hosting, taught cocktails to the guests. And then everybody came back to create a meal together. And then again, like I was saying, we did live music afterwards, and everybody was just like hanging out past when the event was supposed to be finished. And, they had great metrics on how they were able to engage with, like I said, not only their clients, but, prospective people that they were trying to hire. And so from that lens, it's like, why would you spend whatever resources are required to rent out an event venue in Vegas, fly everybody in, pay for the hotels, do all that stuff? I'm not saying that's never going to come back, but it's like, how could you even beta test an idea with us where we help you produce something like this? And then you can kind of like give it some legs to, bring it to the forefront in 2022, which is, we're crossing our fingers for 2022.
No, I love it, man. That's great. It gave me some ideas there just thinking about that, because I think we all kind of think in a certain little box, and, people like yourself and your team can help, obliterate the box and think of some new ideas. But is the best way for people to get in touch with you the website below? Is there any other places you want to promote?
Yeah, there's also voyagerstable.com. There's a link on my site where, you'll of course sign up to you can sign up to an email list to hear about future events that are coming up. And voyagerstable.com is of course like the place to connect with like myself and my team there, or, start to plan something in the future. But yeah, I'm also across the internet on almost all platforms: Instagram, Twitter, YouTube. If you're, a chef that is wanting to kind of like either make a bigger splash on the internet, or you want to like engage with your team more, like I'm working on a course for chefs to hopefully be able to like help their teams perform better. So there's a bunch of interesting stuff in the works. But yeah, that's the best place to find me.
Cool. I appreciate your time and exciting things. Make sure you check out voyagerstable.com or Justin's website. And again, thanks for your time today. Look forward to getting to know you a little more, and, let me know if I can ever help you with anything.
Thanks, Matt. It was a pleasure.
Thank you.
Yeah.